The Renegade's Mercy was older than it looked, and it already looked like hell. Its hull bore the scars of decades-old trade skirmishes and half-patched meteor burns. The autonav groaned every time it course-corrected, and there was a soft electrical buzz in the walls that no one had been able to trace for years. Most ships of its make had been decommissioned or junked, but this one flew still, stitched together by sheer stubbornness and the unyielding will of its pilot, Willie. Willie Wren, freight runner, border hopper. Man of few words, fewer friends, and a past he didn't talk about. He sat in the cockpit, slouched in his padded seat with a half-drained thermos of bitter recaf cooling at his side. Outside the viewport, the stars drifted by, endless, brilliant, and utterly cold. Space was like that, vast and silent, beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, elegant and dangerous, and if you turned your back on it, it would gut you without remorse. A low chime pinged on the console. Willie leaned forward, squinting at the manifest blinking across the screen. The job had been logged 2 cycles ago. He'd picked it up at a grimy port station orbiting a red dwarf. Cargo: 3 live biologicals flagged under Tier 5 clearance. Destination: Helion Outpost 7. Discretion: absolute. The cargo was already on board, loaded in by the contractors without a word. He hadn't bothered to check. Jobs like this were usually straightforward. Exotic fauna, biotech samples. Once a set of cryopreserved embryos for a rogue terraforming cult. But something about this one didn't sit right. He reread the classification. Non-citizen biologicals. A sterile term, bureaucratic and bloodless. But Willie had been flying these routes long enough to know what words like that really meant. He'd seen too much, heard too many hushed conversations in smoky station bars, and buried too many regrets to mistake it for anything else. It meant people. People without status, without rights. People the system didn't see as people, the kind of cargo you didn't ask questions about. He rubbed a hand down his jaw, the stubble rasping under his fingers. Something in his gut tightened. Willie wasn't a good man. He'd stopped pretending otherwise years ago. But even he had his limits. He just wasn't sure if this was one of them. Still, a job was a job. And out here, on the far fringes of mapped space, morals were luxuries most couldn't afford. He stood, bones creaking, and made his way down the central corridor. The lights flickered overhead as the old ship hummed softly beneath his feet. He passed empty cargo bays, storage lockers, and the tiny med station he never used. The air smelled faintly of ozone and metal, tinged with the sterile scent of reprocessed oxygen. The door to the containment chamber slid open with a reluctant hiss, and everything changed. 3 figures sat huddled near the back of the room. A woman and 2 children, not specimens, not test subjects, people. The woman sat upright, her posture proud even in exhaustion. Her skin shimmered in the artificial light, a rich, dusky lavender, smooth and almost metallic in hue. Her long white hair fell in elegant waves down her back, tangled but clean. Bioluminescent patterns, faint glows of violet and blue, traced the sharp lines of her cheekbones and forehead like quiet constellations flickering under her skin. Her eyes were dark, almost violet black, with a deep, steady focus that unsettled him more than any weapon could have. She said nothing, but the way she looked at him, it wasn't pleading, it wasn't fear, it was resignation, quiet, unwavering, and so heavy it hurt to meet her gaze. The boy, 6, maybe 7, had the same lilac skin, his short white hair sticking up at odd angles. He stood protectively in front of his sister, jaw clenched. Despite his size, he planted his feet like he thought he could hold off the world. "Are you going to sell us too?" he asked. Willie froze. The child had spoken in common, fluently. No translator lag, no delay. He understood. "You," Willie's voice came out rough, like it hadn't been used in hours. "You speak standard?" The boy didn't answer, but his eyes never left Willie's face. Behind him, the girl, a small thing with a rounded face, blunt-cut white hair, and wide silver eyes, clutched a threadbare blanket to her chest. Her fingers curled tightly around the edges like it was the only thing holding her together. She whispered something, voice so soft it barely carried. "Is he the bad man?" Then she looked up at her brother, her voice small but clear. "Do you think he has a soft blanket too?" Willie's throat closed. He took an unconscious step back. The mother hadn't moved, not an inch. But something in her expression shifted, barely. A slight softening of her brow, the faintest curl at the corner of her lips, not a smile, not quite, but not indifference either. And her arms, Willie noticed, were wrapped around both children, drawing them close, not with panic, but with protection worn into muscle and instinct. Willie turned without a word and left the chamber. His boots echoed down the corridor as he walked faster than he meant to. The sound of that little girl's voice followed him like a ghost. "Do you think he has a soft blanket too?" He didn't sleep that night. He lay in his bunk staring at the ceiling, the thrum of the engine vibrating through his spine. The walls of the Mercy were thin, and memories passed through them like radiation, silent, deadly, and hard to shake. He thought about the boy's voice, about the mother's eyes, the way they didn't beg, didn't scream, didn't even hope. They'd already accepted their fate, whatever that meant. He hated how much that bothered him. He didn't know who they were, didn't know what they'd done, if they'd done anything at all. But he knew what it meant to be labeled, to be counted out, to be told by the system, by the universe itself, that you were less. Maybe that was why it sat so heavy in his chest now. Before dawn cycle, he was back on his feet. He bypassed the auto rationer and dug into his private stores. A dusty crate marked emergency use only. Inside, he found what he was looking for: 2 cans of stew, a compressed loaf of root bread, and a bottle of warming broth. Real food. Nothing fancy, but better than the chalky protein bars the ship usually spat out. He hesitated at the door to the containment chamber. This was stupid, sentimental, but still. He pressed the panel and stepped inside. The boy stood again, placing himself between Willie and his family. The girl clutched her blanket. The woman remained seated, but her eyes tracked him with unreadable focus. Willie raised both hands. "Just food," he said quietly. "It's real, hot, not rations." He stepped forward slowly, keeping his movements measured. The boy's eyes narrowed. The girl didn't speak. He set the tray down on an unused crate. "You don't have to eat it," he added, his voice rougher than he meant. "I just thought you might want something warm." He didn't wait for a reply. Couldn't. He turned and walked out, the door hissing closed behind him. Back in the cockpit, he sat heavily in his chair, rubbed his hands over his face, and stared blankly at the dead black of space. He told himself it didn't mean anything. Just food. Just common decency. But he checked the feed an hour later. The tray was empty. The children were curled together, sleeping against their mother's side, the blanket tucked over their small bodies. The woman sat still, awake, watching the camera. She hadn't eaten. Not yet. But her posture had changed. Not relaxed, but steadied, grounded. And she was humming, softly, something without words. A lullaby, maybe, or a morning song. Willie stared at the screen, heart knocking unevenly in his chest. He didn't know who they were, or why they'd ended up here. But he knew one thing: this wasn't cargo. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure if he'd be able to finish the job. Willie didn't go back the next day, not right away. He told himself it was for the best. Keep the line clean, keep his hands clear. He was just the courier, not their savior, not their judge either. He didn't want to get involved. That's what he told himself again and again. But the truth buzzed just beneath that excuse, like a faulty wire hidden in the walls. It wouldn't stay quiet. The ship was quiet too, quieter than usual. He made his rounds, checked the nav systems, reviewed the coolant lines twice even though they didn't need it. Anything to keep himself moving. Anything but look at the blinking indicator that told him the containment bay was still sealed, still occupied, still real. At some point, after too many laps around the same stretch of corridor, he stopped trying to justify it. He picked up another meal from his emergency stores, warmed it, and made his way down the hall again. This time, he didn't hesitate at the door. When it opened, the boy was already standing. Just like before, feet apart, arms rigid, jaw set, protective, defiant. The little girl sat close to the woman's side, peering over the edge of her blanket. Her large silver eyes blinked slowly, unafraid, but still watchful. She didn't speak, but she didn't hide either. And the mother, she was watching too, her expression unreadable, regal almost. Still as a sculpture, but with an undercurrent of alertness that never flickered. She hadn't spoken yet, not a single word, but her silence said more than enough. Willie held up the food without speaking. The boy didn't move. "I'm just going to leave it here," Willie said, voice quiet. "It's stew again, not spicy, still warm." He placed the tray down on a storage crate just inside the door and turned to leave. But then, something stopped him. The boy's voice, small but steady. "What's your name?" Willie paused. He turned halfway, enough to see the kid's chin raised, eyes bright with challenge. "Willie," he said after a beat. "Willie Wren." The boy didn't thank him, just nodded once, a sharp, adult sort of nod. "I'm Taryn," he said. "She's sorry." He didn't introduce the woman, and Willie didn't ask. Somehow the omission felt intentional, like a name withheld for safety or for power. It made sense. Names were currency in a galaxy that traded in lives. Willie gave another short nod and backed out of the chamber. That night, he didn't check the surveillance feed. Not because he didn't want to, but because it felt too much like spying. They'd given him a name. That changed something, made it personal. So instead, he sat in the cockpit again, arms folded, watching stars crawl slowly across the viewport. This job should have been simple. Drop the cargo, get paid, move on. But there was something about those three. The way they clung to each other, the silence they carried like armor, the weight in the mother's gaze that made his chest tighten, and deep down, though he wasn't ready to admit it yet, he knew the damage had already been done, not to them, to him. The next day, something was different. He was doing a basic diagnostic sweep when he passed by the storage alcove near the med bay and stopped. A small, crude drawing had been tucked into the edge of a wall panel. Folded paper smudged with fingers, carefully balanced like a message. He pulled it free. It was a stick figure, big coat, sad eyes, a frown scribbled in blue ink, and below it, in messy but legible common script, "This was you." No signature, just the image and the single line. Willie stared at it for a long time. Later, when he brought the next meal, this time with a corner of dried fruit tucked into the tray, Taryn stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, not defiant now, just watching. The woman had shifted slightly, her body angled toward her children, but her chin lifted just enough to show she'd seen him. He set the tray down again, slower this time. "Someone left me a drawing," he said, not looking directly at them. "Pretty accurate, if I'm honest." Taryn shrugged. "You looked sad." "I was," Willie replied, surprising even himself with the honesty. No one spoke after that. But when he turned to leave, he caught something new. The woman's gaze, still sharp, still quiet, but not cold anymore, measured, assessing, maybe even curious. It was a start. On the fourth day, Sari followed him to the door. She didn't say anything, just padded across the floor on silent feet, blanket clutched like a cape around her shoulders. Her hair was cut in a blunt line just below her ears, snow white against her violet skin. She tugged on the hem of Willie's jacket as he set the tray down. He froze. She held something up in her tiny hand, a piece of synth ribbon, pale blue. It had once probably tied her hair. She placed it in his hand without a word. Then she turned and walked back to her mother's side, slipping under the woman's arm like a leaf tucking beneath a stone. Willie didn't say anything, didn't trust himself to. He returned to the cockpit and sat in silence for a long time, turning the ribbon over in his fingers. That night, he brought extra bread. No one asked. But the tray came back empty. The next day, the silence broke again. This time from the mother. It was subtle. She was seated when he entered, as always, her back straight. But her hands were moving, neatly folding one of the heat blankets, organizing the crates beside her. Quiet work, purposeful, as though she had decided the space wasn't temporary anymore, as though she were making it hers. Willie watched her work for a moment before clearing his throat. "You don't have to do that," he said. She didn't stop folding. But after a long pause, she spoke. Her voice was soft, accented, each word deliberate and graceful. "Idle hands invite worry." He blinked. It was the first time he'd heard her speak. Her voice was deeper than he expected. Smooth, calm, like still water just before it turns to ice. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get that." She didn't speak again, but her silence no longer felt like a wall. It felt like space she was allowing him to fill, or not. When he left, he realized something strange had happened. He felt lighter, not better, not yet, but different. In the days that followed, things began to shift in small ways. The woman, still unnamed, continued organizing their little corner of the ship. She repurposed old cargo nets into hammocks, sorted the food packs by type. One night, he walked past the chamber and heard her humming again, not mournful this time, lullaby soft. Taryn stopped watching him with suspicion. Now he watched with curiosity, sometimes followed him down the hallway with questions. How did the ship work? What did that button do? What was Earth like? Willie told him stories, not everything, but enough. And Sorry started smiling, just once in a while. But when she did, it was like a light had turned on in the coldest room of the ship. They didn't trust him yet, not fully. But something was changing. And Willie, he was changing too. He wasn't sure where this path was leading, but for the first time in years, he felt something other than numbness behind the wheel. Something warm. Something like hope. There was something different about the silence now. It wasn't sharp anymore. Not the cold, brittle kind that fills a locked room or a lonely ship drifting through deep space. No, this silence was warmer, like soil just after rain, ready to grow something again. Willie sat across from her in the observation bay, not too close, not too far. The wide window stretched out above them like a hanging sky, stars scattered in lazy arcs across the black. They hadn't said much yet, not since the last conversation, the one about tomatoes and war and soil salted by those who saw life as nothing more than an obstacle to control. The children were asleep nearby, curled together beneath the woman's cloak. Sari still had her blanket pulled close beneath her chin. Taryn had one hand resting on the side of the console, as if he thought he might need to pilot the ship in his dreams. The woman, he still didn't know her name, was watching the stars, her gaze distant but not lost. She held herself with a quiet dignity that Willie had grown to respect. Everything she did felt deliberate, even her silences. "You ever seen the auric rift from this angle?" he asked quietly, nodding to the brighter streak just above the star cluster ahead. She blinked slowly, then turned to follow his gaze. "No," she said, voice even softer than before. "From my world, it was just a smear of light. We called it the breath of Ashen. Children thought it was where dreams went to hide." Willie smiled faintly. "We called it something boring. Sector 312-EA pause." She tilted her head, the faintest trace of amusement in her eyes. "Humans name everything like they're filing it away." "Well, we try," he said. "Doesn't always work." They sat in silence again for a while. Then she spoke, slowly, like something that had been waiting a long time to come out. "There used to be color, so much color. The soil in Lorethan was velvet, deep purple, rich with old minerals. My people called me Kalari. It means green hands. Anything I touched would grow." Willie didn't interrupt. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word landed heavy, like each one cost her something. "They burned the gardens," she continued, "salted the fields. What we couldn't carry, they destroyed. What we couldn't hide, they took." Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. He noticed the faint calluses on her fingers, small, circular ones, like the kind you'd get from years of weaving, planting, or tending delicate tools. Scars, barely visible against her violet skin, not new. Willie leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I used to grow tomatoes," he said quietly. She turned to him, visibly surprised. "Back on Earth," he added. "My mother planted them in a scrap of land between two fence lines, blasted soil barely held together by roots. She used to say they reminded her we weren't machines, that we were still people, even if the world didn't think so anymore." Her lips twitched, just barely, not a smile, but something near it. "You," she said, looking at him more directly now, "you're not what I expected." Willie's brow lifted slightly, but he smiled. "Yeah, well, neither are you." Something eased in the air between them. A shift, subtle but real. Not trust, not yet, but the first crack in the wall. Taryn stirred and opened one eye. He didn't speak, but when he saw Willie and his mother sitting together, not at odds, not in silence, he settled back down without a word, as if he'd seen what he needed to. Sari mumbled something in her sleep and reached toward her mother. The woman instinctively gathered the girl closer, never breaking eye contact with Willie. "Where are we going?" she asked after a long silence. Willie hesitated. "Officially? Helion Outpost 7. Her expression didn't change, but her hands tightened slightly around her daughter. "Unofficially," he added, "nowhere I plan to leave you." That made her look at him. "Why not?" He exhaled slowly. "Because I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of. But I've never delivered a family like they were cargo, and I'm not about to start now." She watched him closely, searching for something in his face. "Then why take the job?" That question had haunted him since the moment the door opened and he'd seen them huddled together. He didn't have a good answer, not one that didn't make him look worse. "Because I needed the credits," he said honestly, "and because I didn't think I'd care." She nodded slowly, not in judgment, but in understanding. "I didn't think anyone would," she said. Willie rubbed a hand over his face. Yeah, well, I've been wrong about more important things. They sat like that for a while longer, the stars crawling by outside, the engines humming softly beneath their feet. What should I call you? He asked eventually. She hesitated, then spoke the name like it was something sacred. Leora. Leora, he repeated, tasting the sound. That suits you. A small silence fell again, but it was warmer now, comforting even. Leora looked toward her sleeping children. Do they know? She asked. Do they understand what was going to happen? Willie shook his head. Terrence suspects. He's sharp, sorry. She's too young. She just wants her blanket and her mother, and maybe someone to make her feel safe. Leora nodded slowly. Then she already has what I don't. Willie turned to look at her, really look. She wasn't broken, not even close, but she'd been bent, stretched thin, tested in ways most people wouldn't survive. And yet here she was, still holding her children like armor, still facing the stars like they might offer a future. You're safe now, he said, without hesitation. She didn't thank him, but she didn't look away either. That night, for the first time, Leora and the children slept in the crew quarters, not the containment bay. Willie had moved a few things around, gave Sari an extra pillow, made Taryn a small cot near the engine room where he could hear the ship's rhythm, like a heartbeat. Leora didn't protest. She sat beside her children as they drifted off, and when she finally turned to face Willie across the room, something in her posture had changed. Less guarded, more grounded. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. And as Willie sat down nearby, his back resting against the cold wall of the Renegade's Mercy, he realized something that caught him off guard. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. Not really. He didn't know what came next, whether this path ended in sanctuary or fire. But whatever it was, he knew one thing. He wouldn't let them face it alone. Not anymore. The ship was quiet again, but not in the way it used to be. Not hollow or cold. The silence that filled the Renegade's Mercy now was a presence, one of unspoken questions, cautious peace, and something gentler still, just beginning to bloom. Leora sat at the edge of the observation bay, her feet tucked beneath her, hands resting lightly in her lap. She looked out at the stars, her posture serene, but Willie could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. It was late, and the children had gone to sleep in the crew quarters again, lulled by the soft hum of the engines and the sense, however fragile, of being safe. Willie joined her quietly, carrying 2 cups of steaming tea. He offered one, and she accepted it with a small nod, her fingers brushing his for the briefest second. He sat beside her, letting the silence stretch. You've been quiet, he said after a while, voice low and even. I'm always quiet, she replied without looking at him. Yeah, he said, but this kind of quiet feels heavier. She didn't respond right away. Her gaze stayed fixed on the stars beyond the glass, as if she was trying to see something far beyond the reach of even this ship. You've shown kindness, she said finally, and that is not something we're used to anymore. Willie said nothing. He sensed something was coming, something that had been pressing on her chest like a weight she hadn't dared release. My husband's name was Taryn, she said. He was gentle, strong, but quiet. He was a teacher. He taught the children of our village how to speak both our language and the old dialect of the deep-rooted ones. He said that memory was like a seed. You had to plant it, water it, pass it on. Willie remained still, listening, not interrupting, just holding the space open for her words. We weren't warriors, she continued. Not like some of the outer colonies. Lorethan was fertile, peaceful. We had no weapons, no army. Why would we need them? What we had was enough: land, water, laughter. Our children grew up with soil under their fingernails and songs on their tongues. Her voice faltered and she swallowed hard. They came without warning, corporate units under private commission, not soldiers, not officials, mercenaries. Authorized by treaty loopholes and profit. Someone had discovered rare mineral traces beneath the southern valleys, valuable enough to buy silence from any council. She paused, her knuckles whitening around the ceramic mug. They wanted the land. We were in the way. Willie exhaled slowly. His jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. What happened? They offered relocation at first, promised compensation, a place to rebuild. Most of us refused. We knew better, so they waited, and then they salted the ground, poisoned the riverbeds. When we tried to leave, they fired on our transport caravans, said we were violating containment. Some escaped. Most didn't. She turned to him now, her eyes wet but steady. They killed Terran during the second sweep. Said he was resisting when he stepped in front of a child. They shot him through the chest. I watched him fall. Her voice didn't crack, but it trembled around the edges like wind at the edge of a storm. I carried Sari on my back, Terran by the hand. We fled into the canyon groves. We survived on dry bark and river moss. Hid when we heard engines overhead. We found others. Refugees. A few ships still willing to smuggle. We paid what we could. And then? Willie asked quietly. We were betrayed. The man who promised us passage turned us in for a bounty. Said he was doing us a favor by handing us over alive. Willie's hands curled into fists on his knees. And that's how you ended up in my hold, he muttered. Yes, she said. You were supposed to be the final delivery. He let the truth settle between them. There was a bitter sting to it, a kind of shame that no apology could soften. I didn't know, he said. She nodded once. Now you do. A long silence followed. I used to think people like me had the luxury of staying neutral, he said. I wasn't part of any system. I was a drifter. Didn't make the rules, didn't break them. Just passed through, took jobs, moved cargo, kept my head down. And now? Now I know that silence is a kind of choice, too. Leora studied him. The stars reflected in her eyes like tiny frozen suns. Why did you take the job, Willie? She asked. He didn't look at her right away. I needed the credits, he said. That's the truth. But deeper than that, maybe I stopped believing I could be anything else. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a savior. I was just moving things from one place to another. He leaned back, staring up at the stars. My brother died in a colony skirmish years ago, Earth politics. He picked the wrong side, and I picked nothing. Never forgave myself for surviving it. So I flew away. Figured if I didn't get close to anyone again, I couldn't lose them. Leora's voice was soft. And yet you're here. Yeah, he murmured. Seems like I was wrong about that too. She didn't answer, but after a long moment she reached out, just enough for her fingers to brush his hand. It wasn't much, but it was the first time she'd touched him deliberately. I'm sorry about your husband, Willie said, his voice rough, and about what they did to your home. So am I, she whispered. But sorrow is not the same as surrender. No, he said, it's not. They sat like that a while longer, the stars spinning slowly above them. Not fast, not urgent, just patient, like they had time. And maybe for the first time in a long while, so did he. When they finally stood to return to the crew quarters, Leora didn't walk behind him. She walked beside him. And Willie realized that whatever came next, however dangerous or uncertain, it would be shared. A fight not alone, but together. The comm unit beeped. It was a flat, sterile sound, unassuming, routine, a sound that had echoed through the Renegade's Mercy 100 times before without consequence. But this time it struck Willie like a nail driven into his spine. He was in the cockpit, running a diagnostic sweep on the upper thruster grid. The system's hum had faded into the background like usual, but that sound, sharp, insistent, cut through the ship's quiet like a blade. Message received, high priority, encrypted. He didn't open it right away. His fingers hovered over the console. His breath came slow and shallow. He knew exactly what this was. The buyer. The one who had commissioned the transport of the non-citizen biologicals. The one waiting at Hellion Outpost 7 with credits in hand and blood on their conscience. Willie stared at the blinking icon. The urge to walk away from it, to shut down the terminal and pretend it hadn't come, was overwhelming. But he knew better. Messages didn't disappear just because you looked the other way. He opened it. Transmission, clearance verified, status request, cargo integrity check. ETA, 18 hours. Confirm. All life forms remain alive, undamaged, and compliant. Reminder. Payment contingent upon condition. Reminder. No substitutions, no replacements. Reminder. No deviations. Willie sat there for a long time after the message ended, the words flickering on the screen in cold, clinical lines. Every syllable felt like it was carved into him. He rose slowly and walked back through the ship. Terran was in the navigation nook, sketching again. Spaceships and stars this time. Leora was helping Sari braid her hair with a few threads from one of the storage tarps. Her voice was soft, rhythmic, soothing. She was singing, just a lullaby. something her people used to sing to coax plants into bloom. They looked up when he entered, all of them. Taryn with that sharp, searching gaze that saw more than any 6-year-old should. Sari with wide eyes that trusted without understanding. And Leora, she saw everything. Willie didn't speak. He didn't need to. Something in his face must have given it away. Leora stood slowly, her movements precise. She crossed the room, stopping a few feet in front of him. She didn't ask what the message had said. "Is it time?" she asked instead. He nodded once, jaw tight. "They're expecting confirmation, life form status, compliance." She nodded in return. There was no fear in her face, only sadness, a deep, familiar resignation. "What will you tell them?" she asked quietly. Willie looked at her, and for a moment, he hated everything that had brought them here. The false neutrality, the desperate jobs, the system that labeled living beings as assets, tagged and priced like spare parts. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I know what I won't do." She tilted her head. "And what's that?" "I'm not handing you over." He said it like a vow, like a line drawn in sand he would not cross. A long pause stretched between them. "You'll be marked," she said. "They'll blacklist your license, freeze your accounts, maybe worse." "I've been marked before," he replied. "Didn't stop me from flying then. Won't stop me now." He turned, walked to the nearest terminal, and opened the system registry. In under a minute, he purged the cargo log, deleted every trace of their arrival, wiped their biosignature tags. He didn't ask for permission, didn't pause. Leora stood behind him, watching. When it was done, he leaned back, the finality of it settling over him like ash after fire. "There," he said. "As far as they're concerned, the cargo didn't survive the jump." She exhaled softly. "You just ended your contract," she said. "No," he corrected. "I just saved my soul." Taryn, who had been silently watching from the doorway, stepped forward. "Does this mean we're not cargo anymore?" he asked. Willie crouched to the boy's level, his voice gentle. "You never were. Not to me." Taryn didn't smile, but he nodded once, solemn and proud. That night, Willie couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling like it might offer some kind of clarity. Instead, his mind spun with the implications. What he'd done wasn't just a betrayal of a job. It was a rejection of the unspoken contract between silence and survival that kept most runners in line. Tomorrow, or the day after, someone would come looking, not for justice, for property, for profit lost. But despite it all, he felt a strange kind of calm, as if, for the first time in years, the stars weren't just scenery. They were witnesses. He rose before ship's dawn, brewed tea, and walked to the crew quarters. The lights were dim, casting soft halos on the walls. Leora was awake, seated by the viewport. She didn't look at him as he approached, but her voice broke the silence. "There's no going back now. I don't want to. You don't even know where we're going." "I don't need to," he said, "only that you're coming with me." She turned to face him then, really face him. Her eyes were fierce, not hardened, but alive in a way that made him ache. "You could have sold us," she whispered. "You still could." "I'd rather burn this ship down than let that happen," he said. A breath, a pause. Then she reached forward and took his hand. And in that moment, Willie Wren, freight runner, loner, a man who had spent years believing he had nothing left to give, felt something shift so deep in his chest it almost hurt. Hope. It was still fragile, still raw, but it was real. And as the stars stretched endlessly ahead of them, he no longer feared their coldness. Because for the first time, he wasn't flying alone. Willie hadn't always believed in second chances. The galaxy didn't hand them out freely. You had to fight for them, or steal them when no one was looking. But now, as he walked through the dim corridors of the Renegade's Mercy, he felt something shifting, not just in the ship, but in himself. The change was subtle, like the first warmth of spring creeping into frozen ground. You might not notice it if you weren't paying attention, but it was there. He passed the engineering alcove where Taryn had begun collecting scraps and wires like a little magpie, turning them into what he proudly called co-pilot tools. They didn't do anything, not really. But the boy wore a focused expression when he adjusted them, and Willie never corrected him. Instead, he'd begun pointing out switches and running simple diagnostics just to give the kid something real to do. And truth be told, Taryn was picking it up fast. In the crew quarters, Sari had created her own kind of magic. She'd strung pieces of old ribbon and pipe tubing from the low ceiling, turning her bunk into what she called a blanket forest. When Willie had asked what that meant, she'd simply whispered, "It's a place where scary things can't find you." He hadn't touched a single thing in that corner since. And then there was Leora. He found her in the greenhouse compartment, a small hydroponic room that had been neglected for years. It had originally been designed to grow herbs and air-purifying moss, but after the system started malfunctioning, Willie had locked it down. He'd almost forgotten it was there. Until Leora found it. She'd cleared it out in just a day, repaired the mist nozzles, rerouted power. Now, green had begun to return. Real green. Fragile leaves pressed up against fogged glass, shoots curled in moist soil. The space smelled different now, less recycled, more alive. Willie stood in the doorway watching her adjust a lighting panel with practiced ease. Her hair shimmered in the artificial sunlight, casting pale reflections on the metal walls. She didn't hear him at first. Her focus was absolute. "You've given this place a soul," he said, not intending to interrupt. She looked up, a smile touching her lips. Not wide, but warm. It was already here, just forgotten. He stepped inside, careful not to disturb the young plants. "You could have rebuilt a whole city with your hands." "I would have," she said, her voice quiet. "If they'd left us enough pieces." She touched one of the planters. "But this feels like reclaiming something." He nodded. "Feels like that to me too." They stood there for a while, the sound of the water misting system humming gently in the background. The air was humid, scented with the early bloom of herbs. It reminded him of Earth's old forests, places he'd only seen in memory and story. Leora turned to him, her expression softer than usual. "You could have left us," she said. "I thought about it," he admitted. "Not seriously, but I thought about it." "What changed?" "I listened to Sari talk about monsters," he said, "and I realized I didn't want to be one anymore." She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes didn't glow like they used to in the containment bay. They shimmered now, softer, more curious, more open. "She calls you Ellis," she said, voice low with affection. "She says you're warm like her blanket." Willie smiled, a little embarrassed. "That's a high honor, I hear. She hasn't given that title to anyone since Taryn." The name settled between them gently. "I'm not trying to replace him," he said carefully. "I know," she said. "But something lost doesn't mean there's no room for something new." He glanced down at his hands. "I'm still not sure I deserve that." Leora stepped closer, close enough that her presence was a heat he could feel without touch. "Deserving isn't always the point," she said. "Sometimes it's just about what you choose to carry." Willie looked at her then, really looked. At the woman who had once sat silent in a cold metal bay, her children tucked close, her eyes hollowed by loss. And now she stood rooted in a garden she had coaxed from lifelessness, her posture proud, her eyes lit from within. "I don't want to carry this ship alone anymore," he said. She tilted her head, a gentle question in her expression. "I want this to be more than survival," he added. "More than escape. I want it to mean something. For them. For us." Leora reached out, fingers brushing his. Then she took his hand fully and held it there. "We already are," she said. Later that day, they repainted the old cargo bay. Taryn insisted on choosing the colors, blues and greens with streaks of gold. And Sari handed him brushes dipped in whatever she felt looked happy. Leora marked a section of the wall with their names in her native script. It flowed like wind across water. Willie added his own name beside it. He didn't write it in block letters, didn't press it too deep, but it was there, standing beside the others. That night, they ate together in the observation bay, seated in a loose circle beneath the window. The stars rolled past slowly, a million cold points of light. But for once, no one looked at them like something far away. Taryn sat beside Willie, head resting lightly against his arm. Sari clung to her blanket, feet tucked under her mother's legs. Leora rested her hand gently atop Willie's, her thumb brushing across his skin in a slow, steady rhythm. It wasn't romantic in the obvious way. Not yet. But it was intimate, soul-deep. "You ever think we'll land somewhere?" Taryn asked suddenly. "Someday," Willie said. "But for now we fly." "Are we running?" the boy asked. Willie considered the question. Then he shook his head. "No," he said. "Not anymore. We're just looking for the right place to grow." And somewhere in that quiet moment, Wrapped in the warmth of dim lights and shared breath, Leora leaned her head gently against his shoulder. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Because for the first time in years, neither of them felt like they were drifting. They were moving. Together. It started with a ripple, not in the air, not on the ship's panels, but in Willie's gut. A tightening sensation that had learned to recognize trouble long before scanners did. He was in the cockpit, sipping cold tea, the quiet of the Renegade's mercy, a soft comfort after days of laughter, repair, and a slow transformation of solitude into home. The console lit up with a proximity ping. An unmarked vessel was approaching. No transponder code, no signal beacon, just a steady burn through subspace aimed right at them. Willie cursed under his breath and leaned in, his fingers flying across the console. Leora appeared moments later, quiet but alert, Sari in her arms, already half asleep with her thumb in her mouth. Terran trailed behind, holding a wrench like a weapon. His face was pale, but his shoulders squared. "What is it?" Leora asked. "Not a trade ship, not friendly. They're masking their ID, but the way they're moving, that's a Hunter-class ship." Her grip on Sari tightened. "They found us." Willie nodded, jaw clenched. "Looks like it." Terran stepped closer. "What do we do?" "We survive," Willie said. "Same as always." The next moments blurred together in a rhythm born of urgency and resolve. Willie rerouted power to the engines. Terran followed instructions without hesitation, flipping auxiliary switches like he'd been doing it for years. Leora secured Sari in a shock-stabilized nest they'd built together, a cushioned pod rigged near the back of the cockpit, and kissed her daughter's forehead with quiet fierceness. The Hunter ship didn't fire, not yet, but they didn't need to. Their mere presence was a threat, a reminder that no matter how far you ran, someone always believed you still belonged to them. Willie could feel it in the way the ship stalked them, just close enough to remind them who had reached, but they were not what they used to be. He adjusted the ship's course, plotted a series of erratic jumps, and skimmed a nebula field no sane pilot would willingly cross. The Mercy wasn't fast, but she was stubborn, and so was her captain now. For hours, they played the game: evade, mask, duck, run. Until finally, just outside a decaying gas giant's orbit, the enemy ship pushed too close. It fired, one beam, a warning. The hull trembled as the shot grazed the outer wing. Sparks burst through a side panel. Sari screamed. Terran grabbed her and held her tight. Leora didn't flinch. She moved like wind over broken branches. Quick, steady, calm. She knelt beside a secondary console and whispered in her language, coaxing a backup system to life. Willie saw it then. Not fear, not even fury, but a determination that burned through every line of her. He switched comm channels to open audio. "This is the Renegade's Mercy. You fire again and we will not run. I won't hand them over, not now, not ever." There was no reply. But the ship hesitated. Another second. 2. Then it veered off, slowly at first. Then faster, disappearing into the black like a shadow that had lost its shape. The moment stretched thin. Then it snapped. Silence fell. The only sound was the low, broken sob that escaped Willie's throat, not from pain, but from the release of a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Leora crossed the room and pulled him into her arms. He didn't resist, didn't speak. He just let himself be held. Later, after the ship had stabilized and the children were asleep again, they stood in the observation bay. The stars outside gleamed like frost over midnight glass. Their hands were still laced together. "You meant it," she said softly. "Every word. They'll come back, you know." "I'm counting on it," he said. "But next time we'll be ready." She stepped closer. Her hand slid up his chest, not urgently, but reverently, like she was rediscovering something sacred in the shape of him. Her fingers rested over his heart. "It's strange," she murmured. "I thought I would never feel safe again. And now?" "I do," she whispered. "When I look at you." Willie touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the faint edge of a scar he'd never asked about. Her skin shimmered under the soft light, and her eyes, those deep, luminous eyes, held galaxies inside them. "I think I was waiting for you," he said, "even before I knew you existed." She leaned in, their foreheads touched, and for a moment, they just breathed the same breath. Then she kissed him. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't the kind of kiss that burned everything down. It was the kind that built. It was slow, certain. An anchor dropped in calm water. And when they pulled apart, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The next day they repainted the hull. Not all of it, just a section under the cockpit. Terran picked the name, the Mercy's route, because it had stopped drifting, because it had grown something. Sari declared that the ship now belonged to everyone. Leora braided pieces of cloth and ribbon into a crest and hung it over the navigation console. Willie reprogrammed the crew manifest. Captain Willie Wren, Navigator, Leora Kalari. Co-pilot, Terran Kalari Communications Officer and Blanket Commander, Sari Kalari. They weren't hiding anymore. They were flying forward, toward somewhere better. That night, as the ship hummed gently through space and the stars passed overhead like ancient witnesses, Willie and Leora stood side by side in the observation deck, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. "You could have sold us," she whispered. "Yeah," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But then I'd never have known what it's like to be someone's family, or yours." She smiled, eyes wet. "Then you're not the man who took the job." "No," he said quietly. "I'm the man who stayed." And this time, the stars didn't look cold at all. They looked like home. Years had passed. Not marked by galactic calendars or trade cycles, but by little things. Sari's shoes growing too small every other month, Terran's voice deepening into something strong and sure, and the lines around Willie's eyes deepening from worry, and then from laughter. The Mercy's route still flew, though slower now, and not because of age. It was simply that they didn't need to rush anymore. The universe no longer felt like something chasing them. They had found a home. Not a planet, though they had touched many, but a place beyond any system or star chart, each other. Their ship had changed. The once dull gray walls now bloomed with color. Terran's hand-built guidance system was now the standard navigational tool. Half his own invention, half inherited from Willie's ancient manuals. Sari had turned the observation bay into a constellation library, painting new stars onto the glass with glowing ink and naming them after lullabies Leora used to hum. And the greenhouse, Leora's sanctuary, was now the ship's heart. Tall stalks of alien greens coiled around overhead railings. Vines bloomed against the walls. The air there was thick with life, and the scent of herbs clung to their clothes long after they left. Willie stood there now, just before sunrise, watching the mist swirl around his boots. Leora entered behind him, barefoot as always, her long white hair braided loosely over one shoulder. Her skin, still a dusky violet, now held the glow of peace rather than fear. In her hands she carried a basket of fresh-cut blooms, soft purple, like the gardens of Lorethan once were. "You're up early," she said. Willie turned, a slow smile rising as their eyes met. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "You weren't there." She stepped closer, voice quieter now. "Did you dream?" He nodded. "Of that first night, when you didn't say a word, but you looked at me like you were trying to decide if I was human or just another piece of steel." Leora chuckled softly. "You were so awkward. I was terrified." She tilted her head. "Of me? Of what I was starting to feel." She stepped into his arms, one hand resting over his heart. "And now? I still feel it," he whispered. "Stronger." Leora smiled against his chest. "Good, because I was starting to think you needed reminding." She lifted her face to his. Willie didn't wait. He kissed her gently, years of unspoken wishes now folded into something real, grounded. His hands curved around her back, her fingers threading through his hair. The kiss wasn't urgent, but it lingered, tasted of warmth and sunlight and earth, like something planted long ago that had finally blossomed. When they parted, her forehead rested against his. "I love you, Leora," he said simply, fiercely, her eyes shimmered. "And I love you, Willie, with everything I have left, and everything that still grows." A soft knock came from the greenhouse door. Terran stood there, a full head taller than the boy he once was, flight gloves slung over his shoulder. "Ship's ready. We're cleared to dock at Alari's moon market." Willie nodded. "Tell Sari she's in charge of haggling this time." Terran grinned. She already wrote the price tags in 3 languages. He disappeared down the hall, his footsteps light with purpose. Leora pulled Willie toward the door. "Come on," she said. "They'll fly off without us. Let them try." They walked back into the corridors they once called narrow, but now felt like home. The ship hummed, not with the anxiety of old, but with life, joy, a pulse. Sari was in the cockpit, legs swinging from the captain's chair, a crown of wire and flower petals on her head. "Ready, Captain," she called. Willie looked at Leora, then kissed her one more time, because he could and because he still wanted to. Then he took the co-pilot's seat, and the Mercy's route flew again, not away, but toward, together.